wherever you are around the world. Thanks for joining the next EMEA vBrownbag with myself, Greg Robertson. And on tonight, we have Daniel Bogda covering the CCENT exam blueprint. It's actually of interest to me also because I'm trying to upskill on my networking since my failure of my BCDX. So this is actually quite interesting because the CCENT, what you have to learn for it is actually part of what you need to learn for the CCNA, which is the blueprint I'm trying to use to scale up. So this should be actually quite interesting. Hopefully you guys have a lot of questions. You can ask any questions you have in the chat window, or you can write on Twitter with the hashtag vBrownbag. I'll try to keep an eye on that. And then, yeah, I'll try to ask you questions. I won't disturb Daniel mid-sentence, but I will try and get all your questions in. And if you want me to unmute you, you can raise your hand in Citrix. And, yeah, I'll unmute you and you can chat if you find that easier. And then, yeah, I think that's kind of everything else. I am recording this, so I'll stick it up online, the video of it, and stick out a blog posting, and also try and get it on iTunes as soon as possible. And then also last week Thursday's VCDX prep special has been uploaded, and the videos on professionalvmware.com for those people who are interested. So yeah, I'll stop talking, make Daniel a presenter, and then the hour is his.
All right, perfect. Thank you for the introduction. So guys, a couple of things I wanted to say from the start. One, thank you for the time. Two, we're doing a session for you, so please make sure to ask questions. Make sure to let us know what you want to hear about. I'm going to make sure to wrap up early before the top of the hour so we have some time for more dedicated Q&A at the end. But one of my biggest things is please do ask questions all the way through. I want to make sure that we're addressing the questions you guys have, that we're answering the right kind of answers, and that we're keeping this focus at the right level of answer as well. So just to start out, I'll start with myself. So I've been with Cisco coming up on 7 years now. I am not a CCN, just a fair warning here, but I did get a CCNA several years ago, and I actually went down the professional path there. As mentioned, the CCENT is actually a very good certification to start with for Cisco. It's our entry-level network technician certification, and the idea was, my personal experience here, the CCNA was actually a pretty tough test if you look at the Cisco curriculum, because it does pull through a lot of content. Seeing as most of us are coming from a virtualization or other focus and then looking at network from a different realm, it is a learning curve because there's a lot of terms, a lot of concepts that are very domain specific. I tend to find this going across the different domains as well, across virtualization, compute, network, storage, that each one does have its own paradigms, its own vernacular, and its own theories, essentially. Now, that being said, I don't want people to look at networking as an overbearing, difficult thing to enter. And that's part also where Cisco created this CCENT certification. And so let me do a few things first, just to make sure everybody can see the screen here. I'm going to jump through a couple links. First and foremost is just getting to learn the Cisco.com website. This should be a certification in itself. There's a lot of great tricks and tips out here. There's also a lot of information. So the better you can navigate, the more successful your time will be. The key thing, of course, is that we can do cisco.com/go, and then we can actually put different pieces of information behind that and go specifically to areas. And so if we want to look at all the certifications available, we can actually do cisco.com/go/certification, and this will bring up the training and certifications portal. And so what this lets you do is it lets you see kind of a high level of what all the different training exams are out there. And so I'll leave this up for a second just so we can take a look. But you actually see, I'm sure everybody knows the CCI brand. That's a very strong brand, and one of the things that's helped Cisco really maintain a strong network relevance, as well as the ability to solve any solution. The CCI is really what we tend to call the PhD of networking. It's a very intense program that takes a written exam as well as a lab exam. And the idea is it can throw every scenario out there for you to deal with. But it's not for everybody. And it's, I guess, representative of that. Within Cisco even, we don't require a CCIE for different roles. We know that not everybody's going to achieve that. That's a very difficult task to undertake. And then when we go down the design route, the CCDA and the CCDA-DP route are also very difficult because it's design, it's taking all those concepts in and really dealing with the whole of networking. And so if we flip it on its head, though, and we look at a specific track, so if we look at a typical routing and switching track right here, this is what has been the traditional CCIE track or the traditional Cisco networking track as well. Routing and switching is the core technologies that support all of our networking. And so as you see here, we've actually taken that and kept that core route switch in place. But we've actually added as well. We've expanded multiple CCNA sub-disciplines, and we've also split the CCNP out across these as well. I'd mentioned when I took the CCNA, it was actually a very difficult test. And that was before we'd actually broken out all these different architectures. And so what had happened previously was that CCNA was essentially a sampling of all these different technology sets, as well as a sampling of all the CCNP technologies as well. And that's still true today in the sense that the CCNA is essentially the 100 level questions, and that the CCNP are the 200, 300 level questions that really dive deeper. Now, go ahead and ask the questions if you guys want me to dive deeper into these specific tracks. I was really just going to cover these at a high level and spend the most of our time here on the CCENT, or the entry-level network technician certification. But again, if anybody wants to dive deeper, I'm more than happy to spend some time on those. So specifically, though, we'll talk about CCNA and CCNP in the sense that they cover a lot of material. They can cover a lot of architectures as well, everything from voice and wireless all the way to service provider and data center now. So we have a pretty good breadth of solutions inside there. But as you see here, the CCENT is the same CCENT across all those different solution sets. Now, we don't have it for service provider, and we don't have it for video, but that's more representative of the technology. These are more riding on top of the base technologies themselves. It's the service provider is more of a specialization around that market and that type of network use case. And same thing with video. This is more of a use or an application that rides on top of the rides on top of the network. So looking specifically at CCENT, and again, if we want to take the same path we did to start, so we can go cisco.com/go/CCENT, and we can bring ourselves right to the entry certification. As you see here, this pyramid is actually one of the best visuals we have. And this gives the idea of the large base that entry covers. And then as we work our way up the base, we get a little bit more specialization and focus, but then also we get much higher level questions and much deeper understanding that's expected within the exam. And so CCENT is going to cover most things at a topic level or at a theory level. And so we're going to be talking about some RFCs, but mainly we're going to be talking about how routing works, how switching works, how network technologies work, and what are some of those base capabilities that exist out there. The closest exam we can actually map to this is the ICND, the Interconnecting Cisco Network Devices Part 1 exam. So ICND Part 1 and Part 2 are actually the core exams for the CCNA. And what we've done is we've actually broken out into two parts of the exam set. And we've got this specific one that's covering the CCENT topics. And so as we look through the course objectives here, you'll see it actually covers a broad range of technologies. Everything from basic network fundamentals all the way through establishing connectivity, and then actually diving into some of the basics of IPv6. And so the idea here is we're looking at small and mid-sized networks with WAN connectivity. And that's a very key distinction between these two pieces. A LAN-sized network or a small to medium LAN is going to be primarily switching. It's going to be routing where we need it. And WAN connectivity now focuses us on WAN and different access technologies. And so that's one other domain-specific piece that does come up with the CCENT is the fact that we have to start to understand what those different networking options are out there. How do we have, or what options do we have for WAN connectivity? Things from MPLS to leased lines, key ones that we've all heard of, and quite a few other options out there as well. And so luckily it doesn't go too deep into those different options, but does at least cover the range of options out there. And so these are the two key ways to really look at what the range of focus is across the CCENT. So it's understanding routers connected to the LAN side and to the WAN side. And it's understanding switching basics to build out those LAN networks within that small and mid-sized network. Now, looking at the course outline, it's pretty straightforward. It's a matter of building a simple network. And I'll show you tools online here that can actually help walk you through and give you a little bit of keyboard time about building those different pieces. Establishing internet connectivity And this is really taking that first module and just adding the difference of WAN connectivity to it. So when I phrase these two, when I look at these, when I look at a small and mid-sized network, that's a lot of switches and a router. When I look at WAN connectivity, that's a router connected to somebody else's network. It's really the same set of configurations, it's just the difference of control. You're connecting up to somebody else's network, and you're getting their inputs, you're getting their requirements, and you're getting their physical characteristics. Is it a T1 line? Is it an OC3? Is it an MPLS Ethernet handoff? And then on the LAN side, it's more of your control. What kind of interface is going to be best for the environment? Do you need to use fiber because you've got long-distance runs, or do you need to use copper because it's a shorter length? And that question itself is actually one that does come up. What are the lengths of a copper link running a 1 gig base T? And what's the capability of a multi-mode fiber running a 10 gig link? These types of things which we'll cover on a CCENT, it's essentially the design basics. What would it take for you to put together the equipment and configure it to build out a small WAN, and basically provide internet connectivity for a small office? And I'll keep bringing these up. Well, first I'll kind of seed some of the questions so you guys know what information CCENT is looking for. And then second, we'll walk through a couple of resources that can help you learn the material and help you practice it as well. Now, of course, there's going to be tons of other options out there. Down here at the bottom of the page, you'll see there's classroom and virtual classroom training offerings. This is one nice thing. So if you go to the cisco.com/go/CCENT, not only can you see, actually, sorry, to get directly here, we linked to the ICND link. So this is the specific link for this course. But the benefit for this is you'll see the course objective, the outline, and then also delivery options. So classroom and virtual classroom. One other thing to point out here, too, is this is typically a 5-day training. So I mentioned the CCNA and the CCENT have a very broad base of content and a very large swath of material they want to cover. Now, the key is that not all this is on the test. And the other key piece is that this information is something that helps you throughout your career. So the CCENT is that very broad base that gives you all the basics to build that network, to build up a routed infrastructure, to connect it to a WAN and provide internet connectivity, the basic bread and butter of the networking operations job. But then it also gives you the concepts to take this further. So as you see down here in course outline, we start to talk about security, building larger networks, and then really start to look at next generation IP technologies like IPv6, which we're actually in the middle of a transition to. But these third, fourth, and fifth modules here are really things that are going to take you above that course objective of building a mid-sized network with WAN connectivity. And this is really going to put you into the realm of securing that environment, evolving that environment, and future-proofing it as well. And so that's part of why we do a 5-day course here, is there's a lot of material to learn for today and support you as you pursue further down the certification path. So we won't spend too much time on this. Just to say that the Cisco training is all standardized content, and the Cisco training partners are all validated and vetted against that. So you may have a preference of geography or a specific trainer, but otherwise you can count on most of that content providing all the base information and covering the course outline and objectives both for ICND and also mapping to the CCENT. Now, one key piece to bring up, though, is there's not a one-to-one mapping here. So the ICND1 is not the course blueprint, nor the exam blueprint for the CCENT, but it is the best training that does map directly to it. Now, there's other training resources out there. If you feel comfortable covering these course objectives through your day-to-day job or through just task sharing and working in the network realm, then you can just take a couple little incremental trainings to help get you over the hump, get the little bit of keyboard time you need or the familiarity and practice, and then go and take the exam directly. You don't actually have to go through the instructor-led training to be able to take the exam and prep for it. You can actually just sign up directly for the exam and take it either. So let's take a look at what CCENT resources are out there. So let's actually start with the CCENT landing page again. And if we go back down here, so the last link we just explored was the ICND1 training link, and that covered the course outline and where to find that test. But there's additional self-study materials out here. So we've got learning labs specifically for ICND. We've got e-learning, and then, of course, specific training videos as well. So this link over here is actually the e-learning environment. And this is something I want to spend a little bit of time exploring and diving deeper into. So key about this, first and foremost, is you can self-service here. So I'm going to encourage everybody to take the time to come over to learningnetwork.cisco.com/community/certification/CCENT. And if you want to save yourself the trouble, I recommend the trick I taught you at the top of the hour here. Go to the CCENT landing page, come on down, and then click e-learning for ICND1. It looks like I may already be logged in. Oh, sorry. Let's go to the other one as well. All right. So first off, I suggest everybody register. It's a pretty easy process to register. Now, if you haven't already done this, this is something I just generally recommend. If you do have a Cisco contract through your company, I would suggest tying the two together. When you do a Cisco login, there's a couple levels of access that come with it. First and foremost is just user level access. That's just basic registration. You put your email, first name, last name, create a unique user ID, and then of course password, and then all the appropriate contact information as well. When you do this user level of access, this will get you the basics. It'll get you the ability to log into the tools on Cisco.com and be able to access the training content as well. Now, if you take it a step further and you link this over to a company or organization, and then that group has a Cisco contract, there's two levels of access now. So you've got your user level access, but then you can also get service support access as well, or contract access. And so if you have a support contract on existing Cisco equipment, it gives you access to things like the download tool for software and for support. And then also gives you access to the TAC, or the Technical Assistance Center, which is our support organization. There's a third level of certification, or third level of access as well, and that's if you're associated with one of our channel partners. And so channel partner access additionally gets you access to our channel communities and some of our Q&A and FAQ boards. So you can dive a little bit deeper into the technology and the engagement there. But you've got a couple different options of access. And at bare minimum, I recommend everybody come in and create a user ID, or a CCO ID is what we refer to this as, a Cisco.com online ID. And that'll get you the base level of access to get you into the training portals, into the e-learning, and then as well as logging in and registering with our different tools. And then, of course, if you do have a service contract through your company, associate yourself there. You'll be able to get additional access. If there's another network admin at the company, you'll, of course, have to coordinate through them. Whoever the administrator is on the contract has to authorize any employees to be associated with it, because you do get access to software and other bits, downloads. But the additional access is definitely beneficial. And then, of course, staying coordinated with your local admin or your company's network admin will, of course, be helpful as well, because, again, if you want to practice and coordinate, best to stay synchronized. And then lastly, if you are a Cisco partner or work for a Cisco channel partner, your site administrator will be able to help to link you into the tool and associate you to the partner level access within Cisco.com as well. So skipping through all that, we jump back over here. So we've got the learning network. So as you see here, it's actually broken out to match the different certification levels. So as I showed you earlier, that pyramid is one of the best visuals because it maps to how we built out the program and the training tools map to those. So we're going to expand out entry here, and we see the CCENT. And this takes us directly to the CCENT resources and landing page. So the key thing about the Cisco Learning Network, and we're building these across a couple different domains, but we're trying to build online communities where there's multiple people with the same goals and same effort that can all help each other. So in here, you'll see we've actually got several discussions, a few supporting documents, and a lot of content for you to review. As with anything, there's a lot of information out there, and it's really a matter of how you look for it is really going to prove the value of what you find. So let's take a look further down here. And again, we link over to ICND exam as well. So this takes us to that same overview we were on previously, and then as well as some other resources for it. Real quick, we'll take a look at what practice resources exist for the exam. And so you see we've got a couple of practice questions. Now this isn't the exhaustive full set of questions, but this is a couple of questions. There's about 18 questions here, 21 questions, my bad. That'll give you a good idea of what each section is looking for. And so you can review these, you can take a look, pop them open. If anybody wants to, feel free to chat, speak up, and we'll walk down this path. But most of the stuff you guys can do yourselves, I'm going to let you do after this. And we use the key piece here to really show you guys where those key valuable bits of information are, and then answer whatever questions you have. But so here we've got practice exams, so we can take a look at the question. There's other resources you can find out online. There's also a few training partners that will actually give you practice exams to go through. But the biggest recommendation I have around these is just use these to get a sense for how the question's worded, what kind of information they're looking for, and what that level of depth that they're asking for as well. Because that I've always found is if I've got a good idea of what the questions look like and what the exam is really targeting, that helps me study towards the exam as well. And I don't want to say that we want to limit the information you guys learn, but if the goal is CCENT certification, we've got to balance the broad learning that entry-level certification is going to force, as well as the very specific questions and answers that's looking at the measure you on. So scrolling down a little bit further here, you'll see some news and announcements, as well as training videos. So this is more of just on-demand learning resources. There's also, of course, the paid resources as well. So we mentioned IC&D is a 5-day course available via instructor-led or e-learning. Here, there's information to do the e-learning version. Of course, a free demo is mapped to essentially the same questions we saw earlier. There's also self-study exam prep. So Cisco Press has a CCENT exam prep guide, as well as several of the common publishers out there as well. I've used all of them. It's really a matter of what your particular style is and what your preference is. Some people prefer some of the third-party training series because they'll take a little bit more time and dive deeper into the technology. Others like Cisco Press because it keeps a very consistent voice around the content. But across the board, if you go out and take a look for CCENT exam prep, you'll see there's a good smattering of different options out there, different books, flashcards, and other online tools that'll help you study the way you like to study. And that's one of the key pieces also, is it's a matter of learning how you like to learn. Because this is a lot of topics, a lot of things to learn. It helps if you can find a tool that brings the concepts home to you. It makes it something very graspable and very easy to grasp. So scroll back up here. Let's take a look at what other resources are out there. So we talked about content. Let's actually start with documents, just because we've got less to review there. And so key documents you'll see is essentially featured content. We'll pop this up in a second here. This is a bit dated, but this at least gives you an idea of what content is out there. Program announcements. And then, as you can see here by number of views, there's a couple tools out there that are actually very handy. I was going to spend some time on subnetting mechanics and binary math here. These are actually two of the ones I actually like to spend time on. They're complex, and they're a bit intimidating when you first look at them. But once you figure out your system, and this is a system I learned on the CCNA. This is something my CCNA instructor taught us all, was just how to do simple math around binary, how to figure out how many addresses or how many networks you can get from a network address. And it seems very intimidating when you start with it. But as you spend time with it, you start to find that it's one of those key basics or key tenets in networking that actually becomes very handy. And so it applies not only in basic LAN design, in defining your networks and defining the actual mask of your host, but also helps with things like routing and security and other areas where you have to really look at a large set of data and make a very specific decision. And so it's one of those core skills that at first just seems very esoteric, but as you can see here, just by the number of views alone, 17,000 views around the mechanics of it, another 8,400 views just around the math too. So combining 2,500 views or 25,000 views just to understand these two concepts. And so I'd say please take the time, look into subnetting mechanics, look into binary math, and if it makes sense, this is something I can spend an hour on talking to just by itself. But the key thing is I really want you to understand that this is at first a very daunting topic, but once you spend time with it, once you understand it, and once you get the concept, this is actually one of those core principles that becomes very helpful to understanding just networking in general. Looking also, internet protocols. This is, of course, the second most viewed document on here as well. And so I mentioned the CCENT really has a broad focus across a lot of topics. So let's take a look at internet protocols real quick, and this will give you an idea of the type of topic, the type of information out there. And as you'll see here, a lot of this stuff is user-generated. So we encourage everybody to get involved, stay involved, and basically update materials as you find support or tools that help you study for the CCENT. So as you can see here, this is a private member who's actually created a couple of these different resources. It could be something he was doing to study for himself or something he found available. But the benefit is he's essentially uploaded this resource for everybody to start to leverage. So let's open this up and take a look. So to keep it high level, this key piece, this OSI reference model, this becomes one of those other core tenets of networking that everybody needs to learn. Now, if you come from a storage background, there's a very similar fiber channel model that maps close, not one-to-one, but close to this OSI reference model. And then, of course, there's a couple different derivatives in here as well. So DARPA models that led into this. But the key here is this OSI reference model, that binary map piece, and then a couple other tools out there that help you understand the differences of WAN interfaces, and then routing and switching basics. Those are the four key pillars you're going to build the CCENT off of. So understanding the physical characteristics of the routers, understanding the logical configurations, understanding the protocols that allow these to work together, and then basically mapping in a little bit of troubleshooting design on top of that. That is how the test is structured. It take you from hardware boxes to a network design, to scoping the requirements, to implementing and maintaining that environment. But so let's scroll down a little bit. We see the OSI reference model. Again, if you guys are taking notes, let's say the binary map, the OSI reference model, and then as we dig deeper here, we'll talk a little bit about the IP layer 3 networking protocols and some of the transfer protocols that are going to be key for you to know. And those will be, of course, IP, ICMP, TCP, and UDP. In a second here, we'll dive a little bit deeper into what these are specifically. But across these different protocols, these will be the other study paths you have. Let's scroll down here before we get ahead of ourselves. So some of this stuff is a bit esoteric for the CCENT. I will warn you guys that you don't have to worry about any of this level of material. You will start to worry about this as you progress down the path. So CCNA isn't going to worry so much about this. It may ask different things about what level of the OSI model would you see these different fields. And so understanding the OSI model, understanding what physical means versus link versus network. And this, essentially, these bottom three layers here are all the network addressing and infrastructure. And then working our ways up from transport to session to presentation, or essentially all the application layer networking protocols, and all the way feeding up to the application. But understanding what each one of these layers does, what it's responsible for, what its representative protocols are, that's going to be one key piece that will help guide you through the networking process. So diving back down, a CCNA level question is what source address, destination address would you see if it were X protocol, be it IP or an IPX, or what layer of the OSI model or OSI stack would you see these addresses correspond to? Now, if we're talking about addressing, we're talking about a layer 3 entity or network address. Just to give you a little bit more detail here, if we're looking at a packet, that's actually always a layer 3 entity. So segments, packets, and frames are different terms we use at different levels of that OSI model. And this is actually a pretty key point to bring up, is that there's little nuances in the verbiage or the vernacular for networking. Things like an IP packet. IP is always going to be a layer 3 technology. That's a networking protocol. And packet is the payload or the mechanism of transport for an IP protocol. And so there's going to be little things like this that as you study and as you dig deeper, if it's instructor-led or e-learning courses, they'll make a point of bringing these things up and making sure you document this. This is something noteworthy. When you see things like this where there's a mapping, where there's a strong correlation. But additionally, as you read through these materials, just rote understanding or rote engagement will also start to bring these forward and really make it top of mind for you. And again, this is also where I said aligning with the network admin. If there's somebody doing this role inside your company, or there's an expert out there you can work with, one of the biggest things I've always found is that working with somebody who has the expertise or has the years of domain experience is one of the fastest ways to come up to speed on things. Because little nuances and the important things are things that they typically do day in and day out as part of their job. And the things that aren't so important, a little bit more esoteric, you typically find it falls off the priority list of the in operational jobs. So scroll a little bit further through this. We've got a little bit more around IP. So a little bit of detail around IP addressing. an overview here of how binary weights work and how to put this together. But again, this doesn't substitute for the binary math and the subnetting calculation documents above. Those provide a lot better detail and let you dive deeper into this as well. Again, some high-level stuff here. So with the CCENT level, what we're really looking for in the CCENT is it's going to be more of understanding what class an IP address lands into. It's going to be understanding not necessarily the high-order bits, but more of what this translates to in an address range. Some of the other questions that will come up, typically at this level, is what a multicast address is. As we go through the different training materials, and as you dig through the CCENT stuff, a lot of these questions will answer themselves. But really what I want to get you guys focused on is what level of question and what level of answer is the CCENT going to be looking for versus some of the other material. Seeing as the ICND does apply across both the CCENT and the CCNA/CCNP, it does have a broad range of topics and a broad range of depth in those answers. And so really it's a matter of picking that right layer of information. Now when you move up to a CCNA and the CCNP level training, actually you'll dive a little bit deeper in here into calculating the number of hosts available or the number of networks available per segment. But those types of questions are typically reserved for the higher level exams, CCNA at least, and then up to NP. And at the CCENT level, it's going to be more of identifying where an address range falls, what class of address, and then what rules are typically applied against that. Just to give you guys a high level right now, the address classes, if you look at these first couple bits within the network address, and this is, again, going back to why the different documents are rated as they were. Again, going back to why subnetting mechanics and binary math are such high-rated documents, that really comes from the fact that addressing and networking all operate on the wire. Networking is essentially, if we're looking at this, it's one of the lowest protocols we can work with. It's the base connectivity between all the hosts. It builds up the platform that we start to build all the applications on top of. But this is essentially where the technology, where the communication actually makes it to the wire. And so with that, it's very well governed by physical characteristics, by binary addressing, by transmission speeds, by transmission lengths, and essentially the realms of physics. What's that speed of light? What's the max bandwidth? Or what's the conversion ratio or efficiency I can take from transmission? Those are some of the things that govern network design. Now, luckily, we don't have to push too far into those physical boundaries. Most of these things are standardized via standards, be it RFCs or be it other engineering specs. And we've got basics out there like the 10 gig base T and the 1 gig base T standards. We've got our fiber standards. We've got interface standards as well. So you don't have to worry about so much of the edges of physics, but more of understanding what an MPLS network can provide, or what OC3 versus a T1 is, or how LAN addressing is a little bit different than WAN addressing. But so specifically, just to kind of wrap up on this topic and give you guys some guidance on where to go study, when we're looking at networking, we're looking at things in a binary sense, because this is how the bits are actually transmitted to the wire, how the communication is actually transmitted across the network. And so that flows back up through the packet header. Let me scroll back up and give you guys just another visual there. But the idea is, as I look at this packet header, and this is, again, saying the networking is the base of most of these technologies, when I pull out a sniffer and I actually sniff a wire, and I see the traffic that goes across, I see all these bits of information that describe every bit of traffic that goes across the network. And so with that, I actually have a lot of different flags and headers and checksums that are defined in the RFCs that explain the type of traffic, the type of service it should get, how many fragments, so if it's too large to fit in a single packet, what kind of flags, so do I even fragment that at all, or do I forward it to other things? Checksums to, of course, validate that all the information is correct, addressing, and then, of course, all my data that gets transmitted. But so specifically, if I'm looking at addressing here, this is actually binary encoded information. This is how it gets exactly transmitted onto the wire or across the optic as it gets transmitted on the fiber. And so with that, down at that binary level, there's actually several things that feed up into our larger hierarchies. So first and foremost is the fact that if we look at these bits, we're looking at the most significant bits first, and we're looking at 8, 7, and 6 in the sense of our 8-bit network addressing here. But if those first high-order bits, if they start with a 0, that's actually going to limit the number of addresses I have available. So I can go up to 126. And I won't spare you, I'll spare you the details of why 127 isn't in there and quite a few other things. But the thing to really look at is if I'm looking at these base bits here, all three of these being 0, that really gives me a range I can work with, up to 126. So the short answer is if I add up all these other numbers, that's my range of networks I can build with. Because if I need to get to like a 42 network, what I'm actually going to do is I'm actually going to build out a 32 plus an 8 plus a 2. And that would be how I add up 42 in binary math. So essentially, as long as I have a 0 in the first bit here, I can use any of these other bits to make any network number. And if they fall within that range, so essentially it's 1 to 126, that's what we define as a Class A address. Now my next higher order bit here, if I actually set this bit to a 1 and the next one to a 0, what that does is that means that I'm working with everything at 128, and then I'm adding anything from 32 down to 1 onto that as my available network addressing. And so what you see here is the way it's represented as higher order bits is a 1 in the 128 bit and a 0 in the 64 bit. And that gives me a range of 128 to 191. These become all my Class B addresses. Now there's a lot more history to this. Originally when we did routing, we did class full routing, and we did different routing characteristics based on it being a Class A or a Class B or a Class C. We've of course moved beyond a lot of that. We've got other tricks now that actually let us use the IP addresses differently. But the key is it's really recognizing the fact that there's a lot of information we can dive into here, being as this is the actual transmission of data on the wire. But then there's also high-level information we can roll it up to. And really, if we're looking at CCENT level training, we're really looking at understanding these address ranges. Understanding the mechanics behind it is great, and it's something that will help you with a CCNA or CCNP. But it's good information to know, but it's not necessarily critical. Now, everybody has their own style. My personal style of learning is I do want to know all the theory, and I want to know how these things come together, because it gives me the tools to retrade it in the exam or in the environment if I'm doing administration. But to keep you guys focused, I want to make sure you recognize that this address range, the different use cases, are being more of the focus. Less so max hosts, although this is, again, good math to understand. And going back, this is all covered within the subnetting mechanics and the binary math topics that were uploaded. So before we spend too much time here, we scroll down a little bit further to give you a little bit more context around these IP networks. So a little bit more data around these. And as you read through this, it should help. But I would suggest taking the time and finding some of these topics that maybe are a little bit troublesome at first. And Google is actually one of the best tools out there. Just to give you an example, let's do a search for binary subnet calculator. And it'll give you an idea of how many people deal with this on a day-to-day basis. There's a lot of resources out there to help you understand this, to help you learn it, and take your pick. But there's quite a few things out there to basically help support this, as this is one of the basics of the Internet and of networking itself. So we'll scroll down a little bit further. This one dives deep into IP addressing and the specifics of addressing, essentially all you ever wanted to know. Now there's a few other pieces in here too, some basics around address resolution, and then some of the control protocols too. I mentioned ICMP being very critical, so I'd suggest that everybody serious about a CCENT does come up to this learning portal, the CCENT learning portal here, link over to the e-learning modules, and take a look at these documents. And I would actually suggest at least taking a cursory overview of all of the documents, but specifically the ones at the top that's here, subnetting mechanics. Of course, it's a difficult topic, but once you understand this, this provides the basis for all the routing protocol configuration, all the WAN configurations, all networking addressing as well. So any type of design activities, any type of troubleshooting activities, all those are all based on these core principles. Of course, also understanding Internet protocols, and then specifically understanding routing within those. These will be some of the key documents you'll find in here that will help you with the learning. To wrap this out, we've of course got TCP and UDP. So another CCENT level understanding is the difference between a TCP packet and a UDP packet. Now it's less so this header material. This is more of a CCNP level understanding when you start to dive deep into this information. Now at a CCENT or a CCNA level though, there will be some questions about ports or TCP ports, and they'd be looking for some of the basics. You know, web traffic goes over TCP port 80, SSL traffic or HTTPS traffic goes over port 443. They may ask you about FTP. But then if they're going to dive into the depths of active versus passive FTP, that's going to be more of a CCNP level exam. Anything where it starts to get into the application nuances, That's typically a higher level question that you'll see. Now at CCENT level, it is going to ask you the question of a state versus a stateless protocol. And as you see here, there's actually a good write-up on what that difference is between these two. So this paragraph, actually these two sentences right here, are a very good breakdown of the difference between TCP and UDP. And so I encourage everybody to come take a look at that. The other thing I encourage you learning from CCENT is just a couple of representative protocols for each type of traffic. So here, specifically, it talks about 4 types of traffic. I would actually focus on SNMP, DNS, and TFTP. Make sure you understand those and why they leverage UDP versus TCP. Now, of course, I'm available to answer additional questions. We've got this next 15 minutes here. And then, of course, we can also follow up with email, or I fully encourage you to come leverage the community. And so you should actually be able to find some of those discussions out here in the discussion section. I'm sure if we did a quick search, we could find TCP versus UDP, or why does SNMP use UDP. You'll also find that there's a whole other range of questions, some troubleshooting help, specific errors around SSH, or more generic. Ping doesn't work between routers. I've already tried these 10 troubleshooting steps. What are the next 3 steps I need to take? But these types of materials as well are some of the best you'll find. And again, follow the crowd. I don't mean to say that it's just a broad guidance, but within CCENT, the best resources are typically the ones most trafficked. And so you'll see tips, study experience, a couple of these other real-world examples typically are some of the best things out there, and they'll give you a lot of guidance and a lot of focus on the path towards a CCENT certification. So taking a last look here, all content, so as you see here, it's all of our discussions, all the documents, and they stuck 2 more things in here too. They can sort either way. What I would suggest is just being specific. So as I mentioned before, there's a lot of information out here. It's really a matter of how you search for it. Let's, since we spent some time in the Cisco Learning Network, let's take a step back. I want to show you a few other resources out there. And then also, since we're at 15 minutes till, I want to make sure we've got time to answer questions as well. So let me go ahead and close these out of here. And take a look at IC&D, e-learning modules. And this is, of course, course detail around IC&D 1. We already took a look through here. Guys, also, if there's any questions starting to bubble up, please send those over. But otherwise, I'll spend about 5 minutes here and just look at the rest of the resources out there. Okay. So, just to make sure we cover it, let's take a look at the data sheets. This is going to be the course outline and some other material specifically supporting CCENT. So FAQs, I always recommend. Typically, if these questions come up enough to be answered, there's some questions you've asked yourself. But let's take a look at the skills comparison as well, because that'll give you an idea of where you want to target training. Now, this is comparing CCT versus CCENT, so our other entry-level exam. But you see here, the benefit is it gives you an idea of what you're looking to cover. So if we get down here to IP addressing, you'll see VLSM, variable length subnet masking. Now that's some of the details of that binary math I was talking about, the subnet calculators. But as you see, if you get to learn those as a base tool, if you understand the classes of addressing and which ones are private and public and how to use those, and then understand IPv6 and how it maps together, this will give you good guidance for the CCENT level of training. If we take another step further down here to understanding some IPv6 specifics, just the high-level technologies or the mechanisms leveraged to be able to deploy IPv6, that's the CCENT level of knowledge. Now, they're not going to be asking you for multicast addresses or what link local signaling looks like. That's going to be more of a CCNA, CCNP level, and it's going to be more CCNP when they get down to particular IPv6 packets. But understanding the mechanisms at a high level, how does traffic find, or how does a host find a router on a local link, or how does a host find a remote address, how does the address get configured on an IPv6 network, and then how do things like anycast and multicast work, and how are those different from broadcast and multicast and unicast within IPv4. A couple of the key things. So static versus dynamic routing, passive interfaces, link state versus distance vector. Now these are a couple terms I didn't cover yet, but these are different ways of implementing routing. So is it static in the sense that I calculate my routing table once, or is it dynamic in the sense that every time there's a change in the environment, my routing protocol creates an update and then remaps to the new infrastructure? Link state versus distance vector. So this is a matter, do I look at the state of every single link and roll it up to a large algorithm to figure out the best path? Or do I count my distance and use that as the vector for routing? So a lot of detail in here, but at the same time, recognize that there's a whole level of detail below this as well. So by knowing this, though, if you know the questions you're looking to answer for, it really guides you in what you're reading and what you're studying. So take a particular look at routing protocols. So it'll give you some focus on OSPF, and then inter-VLAN routing as well. And this is the basics of building a small to mid-sized LAN WAN environment, a couple of switches with a router in place, or SVI, or switch virtual interfaces on the switch themselves. But a couple different ways to connect multiple networks, network them together, leverage that binary IP addressing, and create a routing and networking scheme to put this together. Now, if we scroll a little bit further down, you'll see a couple things around security and access. It's going to be more of understanding questions. Do you understand and can you explain DHCP and how the different options work? What the lease time is, what the 3 bits of information you need to provide with it. And then ACLs also. Can you read them? Do you understand the benefit? Do you understand how to leverage an ACI or ACL to create a NAT entry? And that's another key piece I want to point out too, is a lot of these fundamental technologies, the IP addressing, the binary map that I mentioned, those feed into the higher level technologies as well. So by understanding binary, it lets you understand ACLs and how that mask applies to number of hosts. And then by being able to understand what that binary map equals in terms of number of hosts or interesting traffic, that also feeds into how we identify interesting traffic for NAT operations and other activities. And so you'll see that a lot of these kind of base technologies build and keep building throughout the certification path. Now, network device security, there'll be some specific training modules on this. But as you see here, this is a good high level of it. This is another deep rabbit hole. But again, the key here is just look at the high level, what they're looking for, and that'll give you the guidance on what to learn. Because again, you can dig a lot deeper and you can learn a lot more about this. But it's really a matter of just figuring out what that level is that's appropriate for CCENT. The other check that I would give against this to validate you're studying the right level is back here at CCENT where we have the practice questions. I'd recommend taking a look at those. Get a good feel for what it looks for in terms of security questions, and that'll help to guide you in what you need to learn or how well you need to understand the topics. But just to take one last look here, most of these questions that are being asked, these are more specific to a feature or functionality or a platform. And so it's how do you disable Telnet, how do you enable security, how do you do basic configurations, and then how do you actually handle that response within a Cisco switch or a Cisco router as well. So again, if we take a look at the IC&D exam, sorry, I was going to go to the questions here. I'll jump back over there in a second. Guys, with the time check, we've got just less than 10 minutes left. Do we have questions or anything else we need to open up for? I don't want to just talk blindly here. I want to make sure we've got the right questions coming up and that we're answering what you guys are looking for.
So far, no one's stuck in any questions. Guys, if you have any questions, then just stick them in the question area, stick them on Twitter, and then I can ask Daniel them. So far, I think you're answering everyone's questions before they have them. So.
Okay, no problem. I'll point out a couple of the resources out here. So I mentioned IP addressing, so these are the pieces. Now there's a link to the VODs. This also showed up on the bottom of one of our pages earlier. But the CCNA training videos, so one thing I've always been impressed by is there's a good level of depth up on the Cisco Learning Network around training materials and training support. Of course, there's the VODs up here to go into particular topics, and this is part of why I haven't spent a lot of time in these. So as you see here, I'd actually say definitely read all these sample videos, or sorry, watch all these sample videos. you have the choice of whether you get involved and look at all the resources or not, but recognize there's a lot of this material, a lot of this information out there. The ICND 1 exam, the original blueprint, I believe is almost 10 years old now. So there's a lot of material that's kind of evolved from here. And then also some of those base RFCs, like the IP addressing RFC, that's nearly 20 years old now, actually probably older. And so a lot of this material is out there in one form or another. And it's just a matter of how much you have to search and how much you have to pull it together. And I'd say that's kind of the balance between different levels of content. If you come to the Cisco site, there's a lot of links to training partners or to premium video sampler, video subscriptions. But a lot of that also is there to support keeping this content fresh and keeping it updated with all the content, training, and technology updates. But then if you look at the other end of the spectrum, by just leveraging simple search engines, Wikipedia, and a couple other tools, you'll find a lot of that same information, but you're going to do a little bit more manual effort to pull it together. Just to give you guys a quick run through on that as well, the IP addressing on Wikipedia, this is actually, again, a lot of how I did a lot of my training and studying was a mix of hands-on, a mix of everything I could find out there on the internet to just learn and learn as much as I could. It was a mix of basically finding experts that knew a lot of this material, and then it was also just self-study and instructor-led training as well. Now, I used each tool appropriately. If I had an expert, I'd usually like to get to them about history, about theory, about the higher level things that maybe I just wasn't seeing the big picture. So as I'm learning about CIDR notation or variable length subnet masking and trying to figure out why or what or how those fit in the bigger picture, that's where I engage the expert and say, okay, what is CIDR notation? What does it mean to variable length subnet masking? And why do I need to understand all that to be able to build out a network address or a network topology? And somebody who's gone through it, who's walked that walk once or twice, they'll be able to take a step back and say, okay, here's how all these different pieces all come together and how all these different charts and data really represent one big picture at the end of the day. And a lot of this too, like as I'm scrolling through here, you'll see it's a lot of stuff that if you've never seen these types of things before, this could be programming, it could be finance data, it could be medical charts. It's really just, it's a bunch of charts of information that you may not understand. But as you take the time and you understand what these prefixes mean and how that maps to a network address and what that does in terms of a binary addressing, and then what that binary addressing translates to a network behavior, these pieces all start to build together and they create that bigger picture for you. So I mentioned some other things. Hands-on training. The hands-on training is always valuable. Most importantly, it's valuable for learning the configurations and actually doing the troubleshooting the configuration steps. If we jump back over to the CCENT, one of the things we cover in the high level, the CCENT here, one of the things we talk about in the high level of that is that there is a troubleshooting and a configuration portion of the exam. So there's a level of things you do need to dive into and do there. But the key takeaway from that also is that there's training modules and there's support resources out there for you. Just walking through the rest. So ILT, if you do an instructor-led training course or even an e-learning course, look at that instructor as that history, storied, network resource. That person's got history about networking and all of its evolution. That person that has hands-on experience and has that breadth of experience across different platforms and different environments. And so one thing I always say is the instructor-led trainings or even the e-learning trainings, there's three things of value you get out of that. You get the book or the content itself, which is great. It's a tool you can use and study and research. You get access to that expert, which again is that expertise, it's that history, it's that different perspective, or it's something that's taking those chapters and chapters of information and breaking it down to a very simple content for you. And then it's the networking inside the class. So it's the other students, the other experiences, and everybody that brings their own flavor to the learning. And that third piece is something we can complement with the communities out here with a bunch of the different learning resources. And again, the first two pieces, it's a matter of just seeing if you can find those out there on your own, be it experts, be it the network admin, or live in the day-to-day if you are the network admin for your company. But it's a balance of these different pieces. The other things I do encourage you to do as well is to find your local Cisco users group. That's another group that helps to enable, to train, and get you plugged into a lot more resources out there. But the key is, and it's a bit ironic, but the key around networking is, of course, the network. And it's to build your network of peers, build your network of experts, and build your network of resources. And that's what helps you basically tackle these different tasks to see that path from a CCENT to an associate to a professional level certification, and As you build up the network, you'll find if you've got that passion to really pursue an expert level or really to dive that deep into certification. But at a minimum, I'd say the CCENT and the CCNA level understanding that you'll gain, those can be critical across all domains as well. One thing that got me into networking originally was coming from a web design side and actually slowly digging deeper into the layers and layers and understanding how the pieces came together. But having gotten down to the networking layer, at the same time, it's now brought me the opposite path, where understanding the network, understanding the topology, understanding the infrastructure that we're building solutions against also helps me start to understand the trade-offs in application design or in solution design, or just the big picture of how the overall environment comes together. And again, because we're dealing with some of the limits of physics, how fast can light travel, how far can electricity go down a copper wire, how fast can you switch electrons within a piece of silicon. Those types of limits, while they're more of a professional level understanding, having the tools to understand those or to see how they impact the overall design or the overall environment, that's a very important, very critical level of understanding. It's not for everybody, but if you're the type of person that does like to dive into detail, does like to understand how these things work, and does love to see how this eventually all happens, this is, at least a CCENT and a CCNA, those are critical tools to help you understand all that, pull the big picture back together. So guys, we're right at the hour. I'm happy to stay on a little bit longer and answer some questions if there's anything specific out there. I feel like there's a lot of good training resources out here. I'd rather encourage you guys all to take a look at the good resources out there and come back with questions than for me to try to do a partial coverage of any of these great topics in just a few minutes we have. But I'm happy to spend a couple minutes and just give you kind of a high level or some direction and guidance on particular topics. But otherwise, I'd encourage everybody to go to cisco.com/go/CCENT, register or log in if you have already registered, and then start navigating those different links. And find yourself over here to the Cisco Learning Network and the depth of material that you'll find out here as well.
Cool. We don't seem to have any questions. Which is okay. If you guys also want to find Daniel on Twitter and ask him any questions, it's Bogda, so D-A-B-O-G-D-A. I'm sure, Daniel's not busy. He can redirect you to other portions and maybe answer some of your questions when he has a moment.
Yep, that's also my email address as well. So dabogda@cisco.com as well. So feel free to tweet, to email, and if it's not me, I can get you plugged into an expert or a local resource or help you to find some local user groups or other communities out there that can help you on the training path.
Awesome. That's always nice when someone's willing to give their email address. Matthew Turner said, thanks, it's been very helpful. Cool. I think we've pretty much made it on the hour, which is good. And yeah, I see the CCENT covers a lot of the stuff, well, at least that first portion of the CCNA, so it's quite interesting also.
Yeah, and if there's stuff that rolls up over the next few weeks here, if there's a couple of questions we want to dive deeper into, I'm happy to spend another hour and we can get right into subnetting or right into IP routing or the difference between TCP and UDP. But at the same time, there's a lot of good resources out there, so I encourage you all to take a look at what's out there first.
Okay.
I'm happy to spend the time to help people over the hump and to get them along the path there.
Yeah, that's perfect. Okay, yeah, we'll get people's interest in it and questions, and we can try and redirect and focus on some stuff if people have any more questions. Cool. Doesn't look like there's any more questions, so thanks, Daniel. That was really, really helpful. Jonathan's been sticking up. Yeah, we're doing a series of Cisco networking portions. So we're doing some on the EMEA vBrownbag, some on the US. So keep an eye out for all of those. We've got quite a few of them, and I think a couple have already gone onto the iTunes feed as well as our professionalvmware.com. And yeah, hopefully everyone finds it interesting. From the amount of people watching them, they do seem to be quite popular, which is great. And yeah, if you do the CCENT, let Daniel and the vBrownbag guys know, and hopefully it's beneficial to you. Cool. Thanks, Daniel. That was really good.
All right, perfect. Well, thank you guys for the time. I appreciate the audience and appreciate the chance to speak with you guys. And anything we can do to help, please let us know. Thank you.
Shall do. Thanks, guys.